I am Dr. Lois Lawson-Burdell, Chair of the College Assembly's Diversity Committee, and I'm also an assistant professor, newly assistant professor, but I've been here 30 plus years. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Mrs. Alexandra Oasin, who's gonna introduce the guests, and then she will also be asking questions of the guests. Thank you.
Thank you, good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Oasin, and I will be facilitating this discussion with Mr. Mark Brewer and Mrs. Sylvia Richardson. We did this program in Pitman, where we all reside, last week, and we are so happy that Dr. Burdell invited us here to speak to you, and thank you so much for coming today. So the format that we will do is, first of all, Mr. Brewer, Mark Brewer, an author, will read an excerpt from his newest book, which has a chapter called The Activist that is focusing on Mrs. Richardson. So he will read a portion of that chapter, and then we will ask some questions to Mrs. Richardson, and we open it up to the audience to ask questions as well. Mrs. Richardson is a wealth of knowledge. She is living history. Ask her questions. She has fantastic stories to tell, so really take advantage of this, because it's very rare that we have someone of this stature and who has this much knowledge about history in this area in particular, who can join us. So please take advantage of having this wonderful woman here and ask as many questions as you can think of. So we will get started with Mark Brewer. Yeah, I'm gonna let Mark first do his portion, then I will give their bios, only because I have to get it on my phone and I don't want to make you wait.
So it's obvious there are some students here. And back in the 1800s, I was a student here. And I met my wife right over on those steps over there. And I also taught as an adjunct here. So did Mrs. Richardson. Sylvia and I are great friends. She lives 2 doors away from me. We watch all the Eagles games together. And she is, really is a bit of living history. So what I'm going to share does come from, not my latest book. My latest book is Moments in Baseball History. But this comes from a book about moments in history. And I had just about finished the book, and my wife said, "Why don't you put a chapter about Sylvia in it?" And at first I didn't want to, because I was almost finished. But I thought about it, and I thought, yeah. But I had no idea of the experiences she'd had. And so I'm so glad that I went down and interviewed her and got to know her even better and know some of the many experiences that she's had in her life. Elsie Sylvia Wallace was born in 1935 and grew up in Pitman, New Jersey, a small town in southern New Jersey about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia. The town was and remains almost completely white. Sylvia grew up on Muriel Avenue in what was then the black section of town. "You knew who you were," Sylvia says of living in Pitman in the 1940s and 50s. She recalls that as a child, she had to sit in the balcony of the Broadway theater to watch a film. The lower seating was reserved for whites only. Her parents were intelligent people, good citizens, and devoted to the care and upbringing of their children. Her father owned 2 businesses in town, including the Pitman Cleaners, and so was able to provide quite well for his wife and children. Her mother was a member of the Fair Housing Association in Gloucester County. Sylvia was such a bright child that she had learned to read by the age of 4. She was thus able to skip first grade. She had a childhood friend, a white girl named Peggy Veith, I always say it wrong. You'd be disappointed if I didn't, probably. who lived across Glassboro-Woodbury Road, only a few blocks from Sylvia's home, but in an area reserved for whites, as was almost all of the town. She and Peggy walked to school together every day. They were in the same class in elementary school. Though they were friends, there was no socializing between black children and white children after school, though Sylvia and her sister did play with white children who lived on their street. She remembers school as being very pleasant. She encountered no particular problems. In high school, things loosened up somewhat, and Sylvia was able to socialize with her white friends after school. She remembers being invited to a pajama party at the home of one of them. But when her older sister, Shirley, went on the senior trip to Washington, D.C., the hotel the school booked would not let her stay with her classmates. She was in the same hotel, but isolated from the other Pitman students. For this reason, Sylvia did not want to go on the trip when she was a senior, but Shirley convinced her to do so. She went the year after Shirley, but by that time the hotel had changed its policy, and Sylvia was able to share a room with other Pitman girls. It was a 3-day trip to see the sights, but the memory that remains most vivid for Sylvia was when she and some friends went to a white tower to grab a burger for lunch. D.C. was a southern city, and it was the 1950s. The restaurant would not serve her. To her great surprise and pleasure, her friends decided that if Sylvia could not eat there, they would not either. They all left. Thinking of the incident still touches her. Sylvia has fond memories of going to Chicken Bone Beach, a section of Atlantic City's shoreline just south of downtown at Missouri Avenue. It was a segregated beach for black people and would remain so until the 1964 Civil Rights Act. She said they met people there from all over, particularly young men whom she and Shirley would date. Their dates were often from Philadelphia and would come to Pitman to pick them up. One of the problems they encountered was that they would invariably be pulled over by the Pitman police. "What are you doing in Pitman?" the officer would ask. When the young man replied that he was in town to date one of the Wallace girls, the police would call their father for confirmation. Once Mr. Wallace gave the okay, the police let the young man go. But after that experience, their dates would not come back a second time. Sylvia says her father was a great practical joker, and one time when the police called, he told them, "No, I don't know him." Sylvia got upset and said, "Daddy, that's my date." Her father laughed and straightened it out with the police. After graduating from Pitman High School in 1953, Sylvia went on to Howard University in Washington, D.C., one of the most prestigious universities in the country. It still is. Noted alumni include Thurgood Marshall, Kamala Harris, Zora Neale Thurston, Stokely Carmichael, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Andrew Young, Shirley Franklin, Douglas Wilder, Kasim Reed, Edward Brooke, David Dinkins, Roberta Flack, Ozzie Davis, and many, many others. Sylvia is one of them, graduating in 1957 with a BA in music education. The day before her graduation, Sylvia met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at a ceremony awarding him with an honorary doctorate. Her roommate, Ann Coretta Scott King, sang a duet at the luncheon afterward. The same year, Sylvia was in a friend's wedding in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she drove there with Roberta Flack, a friend from college. The two remain friends today. On the way back, they stopped at a restaurant in North Carolina for a bite to eat. Upon entering the establishment, they were told they had to go to the back door where they could get takeout. The two women refused to do so and ate pieces of the wedding cake, which kept them going until they got to Washington, D.C., where they were served in the proper manner. Sylvia took a job teaching music at Maces Lane Junior-Senior High School in Cambridge, Maryland. It was the most segregated place I ever lived. It was an all-black school, and some of the kids were bussed in from as far as 20 miles away. If you were walking down the street in town and a white person came the other way, you were expected to step off the sidewalk and let them pass. If you did not do so, some white people would actually push you off the sidewalk. It was not a pleasant experience working in Cambridge, but one good thing did come from it. Sylvia met a fellow teacher, Harry Richardson, and they began dating. They were married in the garden behind her parents' house on August 22nd, 1959. They would move in with her parents for 6 months before moving into a house in Glassboro that her father owned. Sylvia took a teaching position at the Charles W. Lewis School in Blackwood, New Jersey. While working there, she had no black coworkers, few black students, and she had to fight to keep her job and also fight for her subject. Music, like art and drama, were subjects that were not taken seriously by many of those in power. This is still true today, though experts insist that these subjects are critical and help kids excel in the classroom and in life. When her uncle died, Sylvia took a day off from work to attend his funeral. The administration told her they were going to dock her a day's pay, as the funeral was not a legitimate reason for missing work. Since white teachers took time off to attend family funerals without repercussions, Sylvia believed racism was at the root of the administration's stance. She fought it, bringing in Irene Smith, president of the local NAACP, who tried to convince school leaders that attending one's uncle's funeral was important. But they would not be moved, and Sylvia was not paid for that day. When her son Donnie was born in 1960, Sylvia and Harry decided to move back to Pitman, as she knew it had an excellent school system. She and her husband contacted several realtors and told them they were interested in purchasing a house in Pitman. The realtors would show them houses out in the woods or in other towns, but they wouldn't show us homes in Pitman. They were eventually contacted by a realtor from Collingswood, New Jersey, who said, "I have an FHA, that is Federal Housing Administration, home in Pitman." The price was right, and the house was quite close to her parents, so they decided to buy it. But most of the families in the neighborhood objected, even signing a petition to keep them out. They were very ugly toward us, Sylvia recalls. They didn't want us here. "Everybody likes Pitman" is the town's slogan, but apparently Pitman has not always liked everybody. 4 families did not sign the petition, and they were friendly toward Sylvia and Harry. One family even had them over for dinner to make them feel welcome. The Pitman Ministerium stepped in to mediate the situation, but this organization of Pitman ministers could not convince those families who had signed the petition to set aside their objections. But legally, nothing could keep the Richardsons from buying the house, and so they did. After moving in, Sylvia's family continued to receive poor treatment from some neighbors. One neighbor had a boy about Donnie's age. The 2 children would sometimes be outside at the same time and would naturally play together. But if one of the white boy's parents saw this, they would take their son inside and tell Donnie to go home. They would also complain, in Sylvia's words, if Donnie so much as put his foot on their grass. When Donnie was in kindergarten, some students called him the N-word. They also taunted him by asking, "What color are you under your clothes?" Teachers at the school sent Donnie around to different classes where he was to point out the kids who had called him the N-word. Donnie was innocent and did not understand the absurdity of this action. It could easily lead to Donnie getting ganged up and physically beaten. Rather than risk it, Harry and Sylvia pulled Donnie out of Pitman schools and sent him to the Friends School in Woodbury. Sylvia became involved with an encounter group that she joined through church. All of the churches were segregated at that time, and the Richardsons attended Glassboro Baptist Church. The Encounter Group fought to desegregate lakes, local lakes, such as Lake Candle, Senior Lake, Iona Lake, and Lake Garrison. The lakes were supposed to be open to all races, but to prove they were not following the law, the Encounter Group first sent a white couple to one of the lakes. They were allowed to join the lake for a $5 fee. But when Sylvia and her mother tried to obtain membership at the same lake, they were told, "You can't come here." The Encounter Group fought this illegal racism, and the lakes were forced to integrate. I'm going to stop here. My chapter on Sylvia has more at the beginning and more at the end, but this is about her, so I'm going to let her do the talking. But I will read you the last sentence of this chapter and the last sentence of this book, and it is absolutely true. Sylvia Richardson is a treasure and a living link to many moments in history from days gone by.
Thank you, Mark, for that excerpt of your book, and not your most recent one, but one of your fantastic books. So I will read to you Mrs. Richardson's bio at this point, and also Mark Brewer's bio. A graduate of Howard University, Mrs. Richardson received her Master of Arts degree from Rowan University. She has completed postgraduate work at the Peabody Institute, Johns Hopkins University, Kodali Studies in Budapest, Hungary, studied in Salzburg, Austria. Mrs. Richardson is a widow, mother of 3 sons, and a grandmother of 6. She retired from teaching music in the public school system after 34 years of service. Mrs. Richardson is the co-founder of the Gloucester County Children's Choir and was the choir director and soloist at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Pitman for 29 years. She sang with the Mary Green Singers and has traveled extensively in the United States and abroad. She lives in Pitman, New Jersey. Mr. Mark Brewer has taught U.S. history for 31 years at the public school, community college, and university levels. He has his BA in Education, Language Arts, and Social Studies from Rowan University, and a master's in U.S. history from Temple University. He is the author of 6 nonfiction books: For Virginia, Swim, Surrender, or Die, Moments in History 1, Moments in History 2, Because, and Moments in Baseball History. And 2 works of fiction, Squire William's Lucky Day and In the Days of Lord William. He lives in Pitman with his wife, Lori, and 2 cats. So I'm honored to be here. I live in Pitman, but I'm also the chairperson of the Pitman Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which is a new committee. We've been around for about a year, so I don't know if anyone here lives in Pitman, but all are welcome to come to our meetings. But that's a committee that's really in its infancy at this point, so we're so happy to be able to be here with you today. And again, as I said, please listen carefully and formulate your questions. And Mrs. Richardson is a wealth of knowledge, so we will start. She's gonna sit here, but she'll kind of get up and down, and I'll ask the questions from here. So I don't want the spotlight necessarily to be on me. I'd rather it be on her. So Mrs. Richardson, could you please tell us how your family came to live in Pitman, in particular after you were married?
My parents came to live in Pitman because my mother went to, it was called Glassboro Normal School when she came. And there my father met her, and they married, and he bought, it was an old farmhouse in Pitman, as I mentioned, on Brewell Avenue. And that's how we came to live in Pitman. I was born in Atlantic City, and I went home to, that's where I was born. But I spent my life in Pitman, except when I went off to school.
Okay, thank you. And Mark spoke a little bit about your school experience when you were in Pitman.
Yes, I love school, and as he said, I was reading before I went to school. And so in kindergarten, I taught reading. So I went on to didn't go to first grade, I went on to second grade. And I just always loved school and always knew that I wanted to be a teacher also. And I think I studied music in Salzburg, Austria at the Mozarteum for a year, and we went on to Budapest for a week to study as well. And I think it's important for all of us to know that in Hungary, the children start at 3 years old learning music. This is important to me because, as was mentioned, and as some of you may have experienced, music and art and some of even economics, not economics, but so on in the home economics, I meant to say, are often not felt important, but we know that they are. To me, music is the best therapy I could have. But yes, so I was able to take my children's choir. They won. They were able to represent the state of New Jersey in Vienna, Austria in 2009. And we sang all the way down to Munich, Germany. So yes, music is the heartbeat, I say, but in Hungary I found that they started music at 3. And by the time children were in the 8th grade, we would go to the different schools to observe them. And all the 8th graders could play piano, they knew theory, and they had a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. So we did talk about this a little bit at our last presentation, but since this is not a necessarily Pitman audience, if you could tell us a little bit about Pitman, and then tell us if you think, based on your experiences and your family's experiences, if you would encourage families of color today to move into Pitman.
Yes, I would encourage families to move into Pitman because the only way that you get to know each other is by living together, going to school together, just being neighbors. So I think it's a good way to learn to be diverse. Diversity is very important, I think, in our lives.
Thank you. Now, going away a little bit from your experiences in Pitman, I know you worked for a lot of different causes during your life. Can you tell us a little about your work in voting rights?
Well, I sat on every election, I always worked at the polls, and most elections I would go out and try to register voters. In fact, I think I came here, I don't know how many years, we would come to Gloucester County College, well, that's Rowan of Southern New Jersey, I think is the name now. We would come here and register voters. We would register them at Camden County College, we'd in the mall, wherever we could. I was a committee woman when I lived in Glassboro, and as was mentioned, Mark mentioned that there was a person from Collingswood. I don't know whether people realize, the realtors have, and it's not a written code, but I don't know what you call it, but they have a code, they had one, and in some places, we know it still exists. They will not show you a house. If they don't want they don't want you there, they will not. So you have to fight for that. You cannot sit back. If you want something, you have every right to do and live wherever you want to.
And that's an important point. Thank you for that. And I think one thing we can take from Mrs. Richardson definitely is to get involved. if you're not happy with something, to get involved. So can you tell us some of the other organizations and some of the other causes that you've supported throughout the years?
Well, the first one, which was mentioned, other than getting our home, was opening up the lakes and rivers and other places that one could go to swim. And also the fair housing. Mother joined the Fair Housing Committee. I was very active in the NAACP. I worked that every issue that we had to work for, I was active in doing that. And let's see what else. So I'd like to mention that we couldn't go into the Lake Candle or Senior Lake or whatever in the area. So my father built a pool. And we had the very first pool in Pitman. But you know, we shouldn't have to do that, but it was wonderful. In fact, I got married in front of the pool and had a beautiful garden wedding. But my parents kind of shielded us, so I was not prepared for some of the things that happened to my son. So that's why we took him out. And of course, the school was not prepared to handle it properly. And because they did not look into the hotel before my sister and I went, or the area. And this I know is not a question but I just found out that New Jersey was the last state to abolish slavery. That's something I just learned in Black history. New Jersey was the last state, I should put it that way, to abolish slavery. So we still have to do things. I mean, we're not there, but there are other things. And in the sorority, I'm on the Social Action Committee, and we're always doing something to help in many different ways to help further. Well, I won't go into all of the things, but
which sorority is that?
Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Here we are.
Thank you. Now, Mark spoke in his portion of the book about you being able to meet Dr. Martin Luther King. Can you tell us, I know you've had, two different experiences with Dr. King, one, very happy and one a little more somber. If you could tell everyone about those experiences, please.
Well, as was mentioned, Dr. King received an honorary doctorate degree the year I graduated from Howard. And as you know, his wife is a wonderful singer, and so was my roommate. So I was able to meet them at that time. And I followed, as I said, I was always involved in something during the civil rights movement, so I always admired Dr. King's, all of his work that he did to try to, in the civil rights movement. And that letter that he wrote in Birmingham jail, I just read over, I'll never forget. But I admired him so when the March on Washington came, I was there. And that was, as Mark expressed it so beautifully, I thought, in the book. It was a very exciting time, just riding down in the bus. There were hundreds of buses going down, and the people were so friendly. They're hollering out the window, we're singing. It was just a wonderful feeling. And Kennedy was the president at that time, and they were so afraid that, it might not be they didn't know what would happen with so many people gathering at this March on Washington.
They thought the blacks would cause the problem.
But it was, as I said, a wonderful feeling. You just felt the love, everybody wanting to do whatever has to be done to gain all of our civil rights, and to, of course, to listen to the wonderful speakers. And we were standing, Mother and I was standing under a tree, and all of a sudden we heard this commotion. And what had happened, there was a human chain bringing in some of the celebrities, and Sammy Davis comes to my mind, but there were other celebrities as well coming in. But they brought them in by a human chain, it was just a wonderful time, and we sang all the way down there and all the way back. And unfortunately, when he passed, Mother, Harry, and I said, we had to go. We had to go down to the funeral. Well, of course, we could not go into the church. It was packed with other celebrities and locals and so forth. But you could stand outside the church and hear and see, which we did. And after the service, we walked from the church behind it was in a horse and carriage, if I remember correctly. We walked behind that 5 miles to Morehouse College. And that, again, I was just felt so good to be able to do that. But the people, again, were so nice. They were handing us sandwiches and water as we walked and sang, and you didn't realize you were walking 5 miles. It just went by. And we were able to be a part of the service at the Morehouse campus right there at the stadium.
So I'm going to open this up for a few minutes for questions from anyone. Does anyone have any questions? I can hand you a microphone. Do you need to be amplified? Does anyone have any questions for anyone have any questions for Mrs. Richardson at this point? I can't offer extra credit, but.
I'd like to point out, if I may, I don't need a mic.
No.
But, she touched upon a lot of the racial issues she had to face in her work for civil rights. But she was a wonderful teacher for years and years and years, touched lives. And I can speak from experience with the children's choir because my daughter was in it. I don't know if any of you know my daughter. Have you ever seen the show The Handmaid's Tale? The girl with one eye? That's my daughter. And she was in also Orange is the New Black. She just came back from performing in England. She had the lead, Sally Bowles, in Cabaret. And wonderful thing on the West End, which is their equivalent to Broadway. Great experience for her singing. And she was in the children's choir, and she was also a student. Sylvia taught her, gave her singing lessons, and it's paid off here down the road. And I know there are countless other young people who are in her choir who benefited, even if they're not singing today, they benefited by gaining confidence and by being part of something larger than themselves. It was a wonderful experience. Sylvia's contributed so much to this area, in addition to her civil rights work.
Mr. Brewer had to smile when you said gave them confidence. I'm not sure if that's the only place my youngest son, Anthony, received his confidence. He is a very, very confident individual. And yes, he sang in the choir too. And I like to say to the college community that I used to invite the children's choir here. It's large here to perform often.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Yeah, when encountering the challenges, like what helped you keep going? What was one thing that helped you keep going through
When encountering challenges, what is something that kept you going?
Well, my parents gave us confidence too. And I always felt that I should be able to do whatever I wanted to do and go wherever I wanted to go. I have as much right as anyone else. And as I said, my parents gave us that confidence. I didn't mention that coming up, we had to sit, blacks had to sit in the balcony in at the movies. But my father, one time he took us to the Glassboro movie theater, and he was allowed to sit downstairs, and we had to go upstairs, and we never understood that. But because he is the same color as I am, or I should say I'm the same color as he is, but I guess there was something about him that looked Spanish or something else. But yes, coming up, Shirley, you knew your place, but we were not going to sit. We walked out the door, we knew we were just as good as anyone else. And so that, I think, is what helped me to keep going and meeting wonderful people in my life and just feeling the love that I think music gives. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
What are some of the children's books that you liked? Because you read so early. What were some of your favorite books?
The Bobbsey Twins and Nancy Drew. That was a long time ago. I don't. What did you ask something else?
Those are adventurous books.
Yes, yes.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Mew.
So about the balcony at the Pitman Theater, was there a sign, or were you told to sit upstairs, or did you just know that you were supposed to sit upstairs?
You were told, and there wasn't anyone. It was just my sister and I. You had to go upstairs.
Sit up there with you, or?
Yeah, there were, as I recall, there were other people up there, but you were told you were not allowed to sit downstairs. Yes. Yes.
I ask because I'm from Paulsboro, and I often hear these lovely reminiscences about the good old days in my town, and they'll be on Facebook and they'll talk about how they'd be at the Hill Theater in Paulsboro. It was so great, and how they'd sit with their black friends up in the balcony, and everybody got along, and it was so wonderful. And it's kind of a very one-sided story, because I'm sure everyone thought that it was so wonderful, but it was an unwritten rule there. You just knew that there were certain places, just like we all got along and everyone played, we were all on the same teams, and then after school we'd all go home and play in our neighborhood. And there are a lot of people just not kind of understanding, yes, and you went to your, very white part of town, and then we had a very black part of town, and we had a very mixed part of town, which is where I grew up. And until very recently, it's, there was that unwritten rule. You didn't cross, literally, I grew up on the other side of the tracks. You didn't go anymore. Some people didn't get to go to the river side of the track.
And were you able to play with your classmates after school in Pitman?
I went to school and went home, and as was mentioned, there was one family that lived on our block. All blacks lived on the other side of Woodbury Road. That's what it was, the way it was in Pitman. So when we played with them, and as I said, Peggy Veith and I were very good friends. They lived in the house that Mark lives in now. But I don't remember, I guess I could, but we just went home, and our family was very close. We just played with the children on our block, the Kogan family, and they later moved, and that's when my father's two brothers moved into Pitman, and it was my uncles and us living there, and my cousin. But
as a kid, I wanted to sit in the balcony at Broadway Theater, but there's a difference between wanting to sit there and being told that's where you have to sit.
Right. And have you, and I'm sure you probably have, but have you attended the Broadway Theater in adulthood?
yes, I have the series. We have a theater series, wonderful shows there. I go to the theater on a regular basis.
And does that conjure up any feelings in you when you go in there? Do you still have good memories of it, or is there anything in particular, that you think of when you're in there now?
No, I try to forget ugliness. I don't dwell on it.
Okay. Now, are there any other questions?
I do remember the children's choir performing at the Broadway Theater. And I go to the Pitman Theater often, but I didn't think about the racism that had taken place there. But now that you're sharing this, maybe I'll think about it.
Right, just gives you.
1920s, Pitman had a KKK.
Yeah.
So Pitman has a organization called, or a group called PARC, Pitman Anti-Racism Collective. We have a writer on that, and we have a member or two here today from that organization. And you can find them on Facebook, but there is someone named Sandy Keller who lives in Pitman who is a writer for that group. And she writes, the good, the bad, and the ugly history of Pitman, and there's some incredible articles that she has researched and written. So if you're interested in any of that history, that you could find it there. But there are, a lot of objections to some people by some people in town for putting that truth out there. But it's very important to PARC to have the true history of everything really uncovered, not to bury that history. So if you're interested, that's Pitman Anti-Racism Collective, PARC, P-A-R-C. You can look it up on Facebook, and we try to have events. And please feel free to attend anything. But there's Sandy has authored some very good articles on that site. So one of the questions I would ask for Mrs. Richardson, and tell me where we are for time. Am I going too long?
I feel that you're okay, the audience. There are some students here, so they may.
Sure.
And I'll say to them, or anyone else, that you may feel comfortable to leave when you have to. But please feel welcome to ask any questions, ask questions.
Absolutely.
I have a question before you go on, because you mentioned the diversity, the DEI in Pitman. I'm a member, and you have several members here who are part of the diversity committee. What are your plans? What is the plans of the Pitman diversity or DEI to sort of diversify and bring instructors, teachers into the school system?
So this is our first year. I guess we're going into our second year now. There are approximately 12 people on the committee, including the mayor. And our goal at this point our first goal is training. We think that's important to train council members and to train the heads of departments in Pitman. It's important for us to get the basic training and then the next steps, but to train everyone who comes in, who encounters anyone in Pitman, whether it's people from the school, in our hiring practices. So that is our first goal. So we have started our initial training. We have had one training at this point. To me, and I'm just speaking as myself, Alexandra Oasin, to me it's very important that we have more representation in Pitman in the schools. I have an 8-year-old who is one of 2 black children in his class, probably one of 6 in the entire elementary school. So it's very important to me. Representation matters, and it's important for children, I think, to see a lot of people who look like them. It's a lot. Go ahead.
I was going to add that all through school, I never had a black teacher, black classmate, from kindergarten through high school.
Right.
And when I taught in New Jersey, not a black co-worker until my last 5 years of teaching. And I taught for 34 years. Of course, the 2 in Maryland is included in that. And
You're good.
And of course, that was an all-black junior and senior high school where these children were bused 20 miles past schools because they could not attend because they were black children.
And that's an important time to remember, and it's happening to this day. So we are attempting to look at the hiring practices because we know there's many qualified teachers of all races, all backgrounds, and why is Pitman not getting those teachers in their schools? Are they not applying? Are they not being recruited? There's different recruitments, I know, at different schools, sometimes targeted towards particular populations. So that's one of the things. It's, the school board it's separate entity, so all of those things don't necessarily mix under, under one umbrella, but that's one thing we are looking at. But to me, the education and the training is the first step. We did have an incident in an election about 1.5 years ago where one of the people who actually won as a council member, pictures were uncovered of him wearing blackface. And that is what really sparked this, the DEI being created and really the discussion. And it has been a good discussion. At our event the other night, we had a fantastic discussion. So training, number one, and then just, being in the community. We're trying to be seen in the community and let people know that although diversity is not high in Pitman, there's no reason to exclude particular people, but we have to look historically, are people comfortable moving into a place like Pitman because of the history? And when when a family moves in and they may have 2 young children, you're putting them in the schools, but are you comfortable with them? And I use this word about my son being the guinea pigs, being the ones to go in there and having possibly poor experiences to their detriment. So there's a lot of balancing and a lot of discussions that really need to be had. I'm sorry. Yes.
Because unfortunately, there's still quite a bit of racism. People who have lived there for generations have been taught certain things about race, and they still carry it with them. And it's ugly to see. And fortunately, Sylvia and people like her have made it better for everybody around to live in southern New Jersey. But there's, as you all know, racism seems like it's made a big comeback. Certainly it still thrives in many other places.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Has Pitman given any thought to maybe changing their borough seal?
That is a huge debate. Yes, that is a huge debate. Pitman is, everybody loves Pitman, and the seal, if you really, if you feel like doing it, if you Google the seal of Pitman, you look at it, it's a very puritanical, religious-based seal, if you really look at it. So it's been a huge discussion, huge debate. The old school people are like, no way, this is what it is. It has been discussed.
But it's also a very 1950s looking image.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not like it's in any way reflective of any kind of current reality.
Absolutely.
It's not necessarily tied to any specific, historic.
No. But they're the good old days. We have the good old days and then the let's move forward. So that has been a big debate. It's been it's been discussed many times. I can't even say I don't know what the outcome will be because there's nothing formal on the table at this point to change it. But yes, that is it's a hot topic and very different views from everyone. So one last question I would ask Mrs. Richardson is, to people who would say, you know what, nothing's going to change, this is how it is, we can't do anything. What would you say to people, particularly young people?
Things will change, but you have to do it. And it comes from here. But yes, it can be done. Yes. You have to be active, an activist. Yes.
And active even when it may be uncomfortable.
Pardon?
Active even when it may be
even when it makes you uncomfortable. Yes. And it gets that way sometimes, but you've got that fight, you can do it. It can be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here today, and I thank Mrs. Richardson and Mark Brewer. You're a fantastic audience. Thank you for being attentive. No one was on their phone, so we appreciate it, and we hope to join you again at some point in the future. And if anyone is interested in anything, please go on Facebook. And the park web address is a little long and I don't remember it, so I'm saying just search it on Facebook if you would like to be involved in anything, and Dr. Burdell can definitely give you our information if that's something you would like. But thank you for being here and thank you for being welcoming to us.
We thank all of you for coming and staying.
Yes, absolutely.